Well, hi everybody. Welcome to our session 2 in this 3-part session on implementing AAC in the classroom for students with significant disabilities. Here in session 2, we're going to be going through the process of doing the scripting that we talked about a little bit in session 1 really quickly at the end, and looking at the data collection beginning piece. And we're going to be looking at that through the process of the 3 different types of activities that were introduced in session 1. And I'm going to be showing those to you through some videos. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch session 1 yet, hopefully you'll be able to go back in and do that. In fact, I'm going to just take a look at if you can do a hands raised, if you know how to do that. Over on your left-hand side, if you can do a raise your hand. And I can just get a little quick check on that. You can do a little slider down with your marker. All right. So you look at, we probably have about a 50%. So thanks. It just gives me an idea. And then I'll give you one more thing to do. This is your physical activity of the webinar today, is of the people that are attending today. Give me a little bit of an idea of who you are. For people that are new to me, my background is as a special education teacher. This is my 32nd year in the classroom or working with people that work in classrooms. I got started working as a paraeducator in multi-categorical preschool programs for the Easter Seal Society in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. And then I worked for a teacher in transitional kindergarten, in resource rooms, in both elementary school and in high school. I worked as an assistive technology consultant in those programs. I worked as a educational consultant for the Pennsylvania Department of Education and their assistive technology statewide project. It's called a couple different things. The Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Center, the PenTech project, and let's see. You see if you've seen the poll on the screen. There we go. Give a chance to see, get the results of seeing what people are. We've got a lot of speech-language pathologists on the webinar today, people who are assistive technology people or AT resource specialists, special ed teachers. We have some administrators with us, which is great because in our project that this seminar is built off of, administrators are a big piece of continuing our project on into the 7th year that we are in the Michigan schools that we're with. And of course all the other people that are a big part of it. We have parents on our call today, and I have a big shout out to the families that have given us permission to show the videos that we're using over the internet today and in the 3rd seminar next week. All right. Thanks everybody. The process, the CEP, the Communication Enhancement Process, is a year-long intervention process. It was described on the 1st seminar, but for those of you that weren't with us on the 1st seminar or haven't watched it yet, this is a process that isn't for every student. This is a process that we use with emergent communicators. So for students who aren't using symbols as a means to communicate yet, for students that have the idea about symbols as a process of communication, I use a completely different strategy called ECT, Environmental Communication Teaching, that I know some of you on the call, those of you on the call that I know are doing this strategy already. So this is kind of a process for students that don't quite have the idea of what a symbol does, or for people that have not quite been successful yet with using communication devices or apps for communicating with students yet. So this is the process of that kids need a purpose in order to communicate, and it's not just that you stuck a communication device in front of them. That their purpose is what they're doing, how the environment is arranged for them to communicate and how we communicate with them and set up things to communicate. And that's all what CEP is built around. We talked about on the first process that one of the things that we're using as pre and post measures are the communication matrix and how we make some decisions about what the messages are. So that's one of the foundation pieces. And also on the first webinar, we talked about some of the tools, including apps. And so those are things that I'm going to leave behind today and move forward with some of the theories and some of the practices that people are doing. So there are 3 different kinds of activities, and based upon where students are, because it's a pretty wide range of kids, even though we're talking about kids who are not quite using symbols yet, there are students that we're not quite sure what their preferences are, so you're still in this idea of preference assessment. It could be kids that kind of grab at everything, anything that's presented to them, or if you've got 2 things in front of them, they're grabbing both of those things at the same time. So when you're trying to do anything that's choice making, it's kind of futile, or you feel like it's futile because you don't have an idea of, oh, do they like this or not like this? They just kind of grab it because it's there, or maybe they're not able to reach out and touch things. You have to do other kinds of means of establishing what it is that they like. They're using their eyes or they're using their body. So those kinds of behaviors. So trying to make sure that the behaviors that they're using are intentional, and we're establishing that intention as a communicative kind of behavior. And then when you have kids that you're just beginning with and you're trying to expand their repertoire, and it's not just about I want, but it's social communication, and it's things that are attention getting in a socially appropriate way of attention getting. So one of the things you want to be thinking about at this point is about your student and moving forward with them, because what I want you to be doing is we want you to operationalize what I'm talking about and to be able to choose the kind of an activity for your child or your student or a couple of students that you're working with. And so you want to be thinking about what kind of communicative function. Is it a way to appropriately refuse? If they're a no kind of kid, everything is no, and no is slapping it away or slapping at you, or just, all the different ways that they refuse, you want to be able to teach them a way to say no in a way that is socially appropriate, or a way that's clear to people that are unfamiliar partners. That might be something that you want to be working on. You can't just avoid things that they don't like. You have to find a way that they can establish a way to tell people, I don't like that, or I don't want this, or I don't want to sit next to this person, or I want to get out of this situation, so that they can be a person that people want to be around, even when things aren't going their way. And then you have, all the other kinds of functions that you might want to work on. Again, those are things that we established either through the communication matrix or other measures of communication functions that you use. What kinds of things that you want to reinforce, what kinds of things that you want to introduce next. So think about that. Think about the kind of symbol system representations that you're trying to use. You might be doing this with sign language. You might be doing this with establishing, a word that they're trying to say vocally. What kind of symbol system are you using? Are you using objects? Are you using what kinds of images? We introduced at the end of the last session this script, and it's a part of the handouts. This is a script that we've taken from Design to Learn, and we've used it several years now, 6 years, and we've been modifying it over time. The first top of the script are the things that connect us to standards, the things that connect us to the IEP. So what kind of activity, what topic is it? Is it social? Is it something that is about, an area of the curriculum? Is it something that is about a functional activity? Is it something about a leisure activity? We look at what's the communicative purpose, and then we get into the criteria. And when we look at the criteria of the activity, we're looking at when it occurs, how often it occurs, and then what is the measurable component of it. And we'll be looking at that piece as we get into the data collection piece. And then we look across the script from left to right, setting up the environment piece of it, what's the setting, and this really becomes your lesson plan of using the script, of getting all the people that are interacting with the student on the same page, doing things the same way. Because for some of our students, maybe not everyone, but in the beginning of doing an activity, it's often crucial for students that things are set up the same way. Later on, as we get into this, maybe 2 months into it or so, we want to start playing around with this so they can start to generalize the activity. And I'll show you that through one of the activities with Nathan. But you want to look at what the setting is, what the materials are, what the positioning of the AAC system that you might be using is. We know that for many students that have physical challenges, even moving a switch from their head, a half an inch is going to be a big problem for some students. So you want to look at that kind of positioning. The positioning of yourself. Do you need to be to the side? Do you need to be in front of them? Are you using one partner that they're communicating to? And are you at the stage that you might be using a communication facilitator, so somebody that might be behind them, somebody that might be beside them, and we'll talk about that use of a facilitator when we look at the idea of a prompting hierarchy that we use when the student isn't communicating what you want them to be communicating. If you have two people, for some of you that might be familiar with the picture exchange system, in the beginning phases of picture exchange, we use a second person in the training of the process so that a student gets the idea of the exchange. The facilitator is a silent second person that helps the student through the exchange process with the person that they're communicating to the communication partner. And so we plan for that. In the script, we set up the routine. So what are the things that the staff does in the beginning? We call those things cues. So what does the staff cue verbally? Or what do they cue visually? Or what do they cue physically before we expect the student to communicate? So what are the things that they do to set up the communication environment? And then when the student's expected to communicate, what is it that they are saying through the communication system? And what is it that they have to do? Is it that they have to look at you? They have to touch something? Do they have to vocalize? And then when they don't, that's when the final two columns come into play. If they don't, what do you do and or say? And if they still don't, what do you do and or say? And this can continue down depending upon how far down a prompting hierarchy you want to go. This becomes your teaching. If you immediately grab the kid's hand and slam it onto the switch, that's all they're ever going to learn, is that they're going to wait for you to grab their hand and slam it onto the switch. So if that's what you're immediately doing, that's what they wait for. And so what we look for in these kinds of prompting hierarchies is that if a child has never, ever had access to any of the other kinds of tools of augmentative communication, we use a most to lead prompting hierarchy that we plan to fade. But my experience is that often in classrooms, people forget the fade. And they're always grabbing and activating technology or moving a kid's head to a switch or saying use your eyes, and doing this most prompting piece right from the beginning and never fading to a least. What we do in CEP is we expect that the student is going to communicate from the very beginning. And so we give them that time, and the fading is built in. So we wait for the natural cue that's built into the activity in the classroom. When the student doesn't communicate, and we might just be waiting 5 seconds, we are not waiting the forever holdout, because often, more likely than not, the student will win in the forever expectant wait out, because you know that you have a timeline. You know the next thing that's happening in the classroom. You know what's going to, that there's only so much time that you can wait. And the waiting forever is not teaching. So we wait for 5 to 10 seconds. You have to decide upon the kid, because for some kids in 10 seconds, they're naked and out the door. So in 5 seconds, and then you give or take, depending upon the student, if they haven't communicated the way that you've wanted them to communicate, then you come in with the next cue. Now for some students, a verbal cue like tell me is good. For other kids, that verbal cue is something that is not a good cue, and then we come in with a gesture cue for that student. We use cues like tell me, or what is it that you want, instead of things like hit the switch. Because if all you're doing is commanding to the technology, all you're doing is giving a direction to a motor act. So if I just keep saying hit the switch, or touch the button, or use your talker, all I'm doing is giving a direction, and the child just follows the direction. They don't learn the need to communicate, the why behind they have to say what they need to say. So I want to give some kind of verbal cue that's about the communication, that clues them in on why there's a need to talk in whatever way it is that they're going to talk. And again, if a verbal cue is not a good kind of a cue system for your student, then you skip the verbal cue and you go to a gesture cue. So we gesture towards whatever the communication system is, or towards who it is that they need to communicate to, or towards what it is that's going to make the most sense to that student in the situation. Now, if you have a student who visually a gesture isn't going to make sense to, then you might need to do some kind of a touch cue with them. So you see how this kind of a prompting hierarchy needs to really be individualized for a student. You will eventually get the student to communicate, because the very last step of this kind of a least to most prompting hierarchy is a physical assistance, or whatever kind of assistance needs to happen to assist the student to communicate by the kinds of communication system, whether they're passing something, whether they're touching something to make something talk. So that's what we plan for. Now that's when we're using a prompting hierarchy. So we have, and then you'll see that the types of data collection are tied to the kind of activity. When we're doing things like a preference assessment, we are not using a prompting hierarchy, because in a preference assessment, I'm still trying to find out what kinds of items that we're going to be using when I'm teaching the communication strategy. So what I want to do now is I want to go to some of the examples, the video examples, to show you the 3 different kinds of activities tied to the data collection. So now, guys, this is when everybody's got to do the technology prayer. And if you've never been with Patty King-DeBon or Caroline Musselwhite when they've done the prayer, you just have to cross your fingers and just say, please, please, technology work. And we're going to go to the video. And remember, this is not your student. You're going to see a little clip of this kid, and it's not all the background information. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to these students. And I'm going to put my phone near to the speaker so that you can hear. The first student here, Nathan, is in a preference assessment, and it's during snack time in the classroom. He's not pulled out. He's in snack time right with everybody else.
Snack time. Snack time. Nathan, do you want pretzels or potato chips? Pretzels. Pretzels. You picked pretzels. I'm going to go get your drink while you're eating.
Now I'm going to keep letting the video run, but I'm going to talk over it because we have found if I pause it, it doesn't start again well. But you're not doing choice making. This is about preference assessment. So what you're doing is showing him the two items. Whichever one he chooses, he gets for whatever period of time. What they found with Nathan is that with some kids you might show them the snack items themselves. Here, one of the things that they knew with him is that he knew the snack from the bag. And one of the things, too, that they were working on with him was some environmental literacy, so knowing some of the items from the images themselves, too. So, there's a couple things that were going on with him. Some things, too, when you're doing choice, when you're looking at what kinds of items, because what they're going to do then with Nathan is figure out which of the snack items that they're going to move forward with to do some more sophisticated communicating with. Now, they've been doing this activity with him for a while. When they first got started, he was touching both things at the same time. And so that was some of the things that when they had first started out trying to move forward doing communication with him, they found that they had to step back and do preference assessment because they didn't know which items that he liked one over another. Let me go back and play it a little bit more for you.
Are they more exciting?
And he's looking at the other kids.
There you go. There you go. Maybe you like these better. You like pop chips or craisins? Pop chips. That's what you liked this morning.
So I'm going to stop this video. And what I want to do is show you the data collection and how this works out. So one of the things on the data collection sheet, and one of the things that you may want to be pre-prepared for, and this could be a list of toys, this could be a list of, I have a teacher that will do this with items to be used during academic situations, so which things that he's going to be utilizing to do counting with. So what they've predetermined are which items are going to be up against each other so that they get a fair arrangement of figuring out one thing up against another. And then what you do is you just mark which one did he choose. So when you've got the Fritos up against the Tostitos and then the Tostitos up against the Craisins, and then if you're unsure, if you've done this a couple times and you keep thinking, well, this one against this one. Also, so that I make something clear, in preference assessments, it's okay to switch, an item that was shown on a right side up against an item and move it over to the left side. When you're doing things in a routine where they're, choosing those things and you're doing it, in a choice making and it's on their permanent communication board, I wouldn't be switching those kinds of things on their permanent communication board. But when you're doing it during a preference assessment, these are the kinds of things that you're looking at for preferred. Once you would move on and figure out which items that you would do the next steps with, and that's what we're going to do next when we're going to watch a video of Landon, those items that they like, and what you'll see with this video from YouTube, I pulled a video that you would be able to use and see on your own at your own time, or somebody that's maybe not on the webinar with you. This child, Landon, likes this song, Twinkle Twinkle, and what they're using this now is to see what position is best for the student. And so you're going to see this child playing the Twinkle Twinkle song in two different positions, and you'll use the same data collection sheet, and what you do then is just track how many times then they activate, in this case the switch, to play the song. And then once they're done, you either move on to the next item that was preferred, or in this case they change positions. So if I'll get back to, oops. So now we're going to see Landon. And again, this is a YouTube video that you can find on your own with Landon and the Big Mac.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
And then what you do is you just keep tracking how many positive activations they have of the switch.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
Now, one of the things that I know, if anybody's on this webinar that's a part of our CEP or a part of ECT, one of the rules that we always follow when we have any switch and we're trying to get a child to be symbolic is you better have a symbol on the switch. And it's a rule that we call the no naked switches rule. So you want to have a symbol of Twinkle Twinkle on that switch. And if the child has a vision impairment, add tactuals to it, so you start to build a tactual symbol system to it. So even if you're in a preference assessment, you still want to have that piece, something that's a referent for what it is that they're doing. You have, what I want to do here is take a pause, and I know that when the videos, there's a question on the chat that the videos aren't playing smoothly, and unfortunately, unless the videos are built in, it is a difficult piece that we have here over this, over playing them on the webinar this way. That's why I do try and find things that are on YouTube so that you can go back and play them on your own, but not all the videos that I have from the sessions that I do are things that are up on YouTube. You have in your packet or in your handouts that you'll get afterwards the copies of the scripts for the 3 activities that I'm showing you. So you'll see the preference assessment, a general script filled out for that, and then the data collection that goes on for after while you're doing the preference assessment. So you have your items predetermined, and then it helps you if you highlight so that you can grab the two things ahead of time, if you have those highlighted so you know what you're kind of grabbing as you go. And if you're kind of moving along, as Nathan's team was very systematic, and what you're going to see in the next videos with Nathan is that for some of the other items, the classroom items that they were doing preference assessment with, when they were looking at some of the things that he would choose during leisure, he liked books. And so then you're going to see that they moved forward with a book activity with him to build some more activities, like what he would ask for more of, they did in a book routine. And so that's the kind of marking system. And then, of course, as I showed you, is one of Nathan's assessment data sheets. Next time we're going to show you the analysis of this and how you go about with that. For the activity that you saw with Landon, one of those things is that contingency awareness, that using a switch gets me something. So I'm getting sound out of it, that the activity that I have connected with the switch, it doesn't have to be a switch, but if you're trying to build towards that, you're using something that directly comes from a switch. We're not at the point yet that the switch says something that then does something else, not that two-part piece, but something directly happens with that switch in a cause and effect way. And so you'll see with that on this, and I know on the screen it's a little bit blurry. And yes, the question has come up, are the forms something you can use? Yes, that's why we've given them to you. The information that we have originally started from the materials from the Design to Learn group. We've modified them through our work through the CEP process in Michigan and now in Ohio. But yes, that's definitely why we've given them to you. We've given you the general scripts, the general preference assessment so that you could work from it. And if you are planning to be with us on the third session, what I really think would help you to do is to operationalize it. Try these scripts out, create your own script with a student so that you're doing some data collection between now and our next session in April, so that you can have some data to work with, so we can go through the analyzation process with your own data and help this make sense to you in your own work. So with Landon's then, we use the same chart, but we use it a little different way. Instead of it being a comparative thing, like what did that student choose, what did that student choose, you just do it for each item. So one at a time you would present, and you would just keep marking how many times they chose the item. Now with Landon, it was the same item presented in different positions. So people are always using things in different ways. Landon isn't a child that I worked with. It was just a child that I found on YouTube that I could apply this principle to. Because, like as I said, I try and always find something on YouTube that people can then use again. So this is how the Landon data collection then would look, the trials on different sides. We'll show you in session 3 a couple different ways of using this as well. And then for students that you're moving forward to do more activities with, or even to the point of doing choice-making activities with, so these are the students that you're using the prompting hierarchies. So whether you're doing most to least, or kind of what we really push is the least to most, because you're getting in really observational opportunities of what it is that they can do on their own, and then those opportunities of what is it that they're really trying to tell me, because that's what we're building towards. We start with these scripts, and we're not scripting out their whole day. That's not the goal of CEP, is to eventually script out the whole student's day and to create teachers and parapros and SLPs that all they do is do everything off of a script. This is just the way we get started with folks so that they can learn a systematic process of teaching kids communication. But once you get the hang of it, then it's about creating opportunities for communication, and then you just inherently know this process, and it just becomes kind of a part of what you do. Another nice resource is on Patty King-DePawn's website on creative communicating. She's got her nice examples from the school that she works with in New York. And when I've talked with Patty, she talks about how she finds that she uses scripts for about the first 2 months, and then it just becomes a free form. You know, you're able to kind of break away from it, and that's what we want, because we want kids to be communicating, you know, what they want to be communicating, not what we've pre-planned for them to communicate. So in this case, what I'm going to do is now go back to the videos and show you Nathan again, who's going to be communicating in a story reading activity, and you're going to see with a book that he prefers, which is the Goodnight Moon book. And I'm going to show it to you in a couple different sets of kind of how they moved through the book with him. So you'll see at first, and a lot of people do this, where you have the symbol built into the book, so it's right there.
Oh, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of...
So the more symbol is right on the page. This is the adaptivation.
Nathan, tell me if you want to read more.
The flat PAL pad switches.
The cow jumping over
built
the
into the back of the book.
3 little bears sitting on chairs.
So Megan, his teacher, is his partner. The second person acts as the facilitator. If he doesn't, she's doing the prompting hierarchy with him.
And 2 little kittens and a pair of mittens. There's the mittens and the kittens. And a little toy house and a young mouse. Quiet hands. Quiet hands, Nathan. Yes, he said read more. And a comb and a brush and a bowl full of mush. And a quiet old lady whispering,
Read more.
I said, read more.
Read more.
I will read more. Good night, room.
Read more.
Read more. I will.
So you see how she has such a nice way. She reads the page of the book. She pauses expectantly. And she reinforces when he says read more by touching the symbol, read more. And again, this is just the adaptivation flat PAL pad switch that they have taped into the back of the book. It then goes down into adaptivation sequencer. So that's where the sound is coming from. But it's not that he has to hit anything separate. It's all right there onto the page. The second person is there so that if he doesn't, as you see her now, she does the gesture to the more, so that if he doesn't say more, by, touching the symbol first. Megan has her verbal cue where she says, tell me more. And if he doesn't respond to that, then they've got their gesture. And now, after you're going to see some of the dates. That was December. If I got my dates right. And now you're going to see here in January.
All right, Nathan.
And now they've moved it to different places, different partners. Now you're going to see the second facilitator is gone. This is a book that they read, and they've actually have different books, but this is a book that he really prefers. Like many children love Goodnight Moon. So does Nathan.
In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of... Oh, if you want me to read more, tell me read more.
And they reinforce afterwards, after he says more, they say, I will read more, so he knows what he said.
Tell me if you want me to read more.
Now, one of the things that we watch out for is if the technology is kind of holding things up. So if, he's touched it and the technology hasn't, we'll help the press because we don't want the technology to be the barrier for a kid not to be clear in their communication. So he's clearly touching it, and if for whatever reason the tech is being glitchy that day, I'm not going to keep waiting and making him have to press and press and press and press just because the technology is not being lightly activated enough. So you'll see, here's another Megan. Megan is also in the speech language pathologist, so it's Megan and Megan is their team, his team at school.
And a comb and a brush and a bowl full of mush. And a quiet old lady who is whispering, hush. Tell me if you want me to read more.
Read more.
Nice asking. Good night, room. Oh. Tell me if you want me to read more. Hey.
He's pointing to some of the other pictures. So one of the things that we can do too is also then talk about the pictures that he's pointing to. And then one more here.
Good night, Carl. Jumping over the moon. Tell me if you want me to read more.
So one of the things that we, he's going to tell her here. One of the things that we talk about, and one of the things that's really powerful of having the videos, there you go, so you say read more, is that we talk about then when's it time to move on from the ways that you're doing it, and when to, when again is the technology that is the way it's set up, because he's clearly using the symbol to say it, and then that technology piece is something that might be holding you back. So right after this, what they did is they pulled the more into its own symbol. So he now has both ways of saying more.
Please.
More, please.
In the great green room, there was a telephone.
So they don't remove it from the book.
And a picture of.
And you see there now, so as more being separated out from the book, not having the technology kind of sometimes of being it maybe down flat or wherever it might have been, he's has been able to generalize over to that more. And then next steps are to add the literacy piece, not just because of the fact that we're using a book, to now be able to talk about the book and expand it, not just being able to change the pages of the book, but now to have some of the references to some of the words that are in the book, some of the actions that are in the book. So all of these things kind of expand out to, not just him being able to direct Megan about what's going on in the book. So there's really nice expansion and building within the activity. And I think sometimes that's what people miss when they're building kids' communication within activities, is they move so quickly from one activity to the next activity, the next activity, the next activity, and they miss the ability to take one activity and grow with it. And move from one step to another. So again, the book started out, they got to a book from a preference assessment. Now you first saw his preference assessment in SNAC, but book was also a piece of a preference assessment in other items. And then they built, from it within a book, it didn't necessarily have to be set up with a talking switch, but they found that he liked the voice output piece. So they built it into a book that way. It was also something that they had seen in, in another workshop. And then, from there they move it on to this switch. And now, next steps, we have our final workshop next week, so we'll get to see what they've come up with next week and where he's moved on to it from here. So again, now coming out from this kind of activity, stop that. And we look at where we go to data collection-wise. We look at how we do the kind of marking on this is that you have your step, and then you look at, where you have your verbal cue, you have the first independent cue is just that she pauses at the end of reading it. That's your most natural cue of when he's supposed to tell her to move on. And then you have the verbal cue, and then for them it's a gesture cue, and then they do a model, and then they have a partial physical, and then they have the full physical. To mark this on this kind of a data collection page, you do a minus for the prompt steps that you give, but they don't communicate. And then when they do communicate at that prompt, you do a plus. Now, we're human, and we're learning a new kind of thing to do. and sometimes people forget to give a prompt. Now, we can't give that against the student. It wasn't the student's fault that an adult forgot to give a prompt. And so on the scoring sheet, what we do is an X. So if an adult skipped over the gesture and they went right to a model, we'll put an X on there, and that gives you some feedback for the adult. All right? There's a question up that asks if you can watch this on YouTube again. The videos of Nathan will not be on YouTube, but they will be on AbleNet University. So again, a big shout out to Megan and Nathan's parents for allowing us to use these videos. So they'll be on AbleNet University, so you'll be able to watch them again within this session 2. And we'll be watching another video of Nathan and one of Nathan's classmates, Ruby, in session 3, and putting those along with some other data collection. So this scripting process allows us to state what the student's going to do and say. It allows us, when you're doing your script, to talk about it in an active verb, so that they're going to ask, they're going to tell, they're going to say, no matter what their communication mode is. Even if they're pressing a switch like Nathan is, and like you saw Landon doing, they're still saying something. And we try and, it's semantics, but it gives you a different look at the child when you look at it in a communicative way. And it's also a way of valuing their communication in an equal way. If they're signing something, they're still saying it. It doesn't just have to be through their voice to be talked about as saying something. We put those kinds of things on the script in all of the ways that I talked through it, so that everybody knows what's going on at what time, and what you do when they don't say what they're supposed to say. What's the next piece of it? If you have multiple steps of the script, it's not just a one-step thing that gets repeated over and over again, then you probably have a higher level student than what we're working with in CEP, which is great. Or you've moved a student through to a multiple step routine. So we're always trying to think about the whole activity. What's the beginning of the routine? What's the middle? What's the ending? And so then what we do is we just have multiple steps of the script. And so we try and think through the whole thing. And some of the times the way we do it is we're thinking about this in a chaining way. So we might start with just one part of it. So, like here in this book routine with Nathan, you're just seeing him requesting turning the page. But how did he request this book? There's a choice-making thing that forward chains forward, in the beginning of this. So there becomes a step to add to his routine. So how did he choose the book? That becomes step 1. Step 2 is turning the page of the book. Step 3 might be talking about things in the book. And step 4 is how does he end this? What if he's done with the book? A lot of kids are just done with the book halfway through. And you know what? If it's your leisure time, it's okay to be done with this book halfway through. If we're doing a reading activity during our literacy block, well, that's a different story. You might need to continue through. But leisure time, it's okay if you change books. I don't finish a book every night. When I'm reading, I put a bookmark in it and I save it till tomorrow night. And our kids should be allowed to do that too during their leisure time. It doesn't mean that they're not paying attention or they're not staying to task. It's their leisure time. So put a bookmark in it. We'll come back to it when you want to come back to it. So they should be allowed to say, I'm done with the book right now. Teacher, it's okay. Mom, I'll do this tomorrow. And so I will have a bookmark for my kid. Again, if it's leisure time, it's okay. And then I say that I'm at the end of it. So think about that with your students, to be able to have multiple steps of the activity, to have, and when we do with scripts is we have, a page of the script for each part of the activity so that everybody knows what's expected. So as you're thinking about it, if you're going to be joining us for next time, so I have an idea, let us know if you're going to be joining us for session 3. You just click on this if you are. And again, what I'd love it for you to do is to give this a try with your own child or your own student, whatever kind of script you're going to be liking to do. If you would like to, send it to me. I'll take a look at it and give you some ideas and send it back. You can get to my email. I'll have my email here at the ending slide, or you can get to it off of my website. We still have people responding here. I hope I've been able to give you some ideas. Again, this is not a process that we use with every student. This is a process that we've gotten started with kids that kind of are on that communication scale from birth to about 18 months language-wise. You know, maybe birth to push it maybe 2 years. Otherwise, we're using other systems that have been, other kinds of systems that we created. So there's 56 people that have responded. Of course, it's going to give us a 100% here in this kind of a poll. So I'm looking forward to that. Typically, so if you are the 56 people, typically what my teams that I'm working with are doing is videotaping their students in an activity once a month. For our purposes here, if you want to do a video each week or more than that, it's easier to go back and do the data collection by watching the video, because then you can go say, oh, is that what I saw? Is that what I saw? But as you've seen in some of the videos, like with even what happens with Nathan, he looks up and he sees the video camera, he gets distracted by it, and then he kind of looks up and smiles at it, and then it kind of takes you away from the activity. If you're doing the preference assessments, sometimes you can mark the chart really quickly, which one they chose out of the 2. That kind of helps. But hopefully we've given you enough here in the handout that you can choose the appropriate data collection for the activity that you're doing. Thank you again for joining me here in session 2. And for those of you that will be joining in session 3 either live or be able to watch it on AbleNet University, that would be really helpful. The scripts are a part of the handouts. If you want them, so you can get those in the handout that way. If you want them in a Word document, you can just email me and I can get them to you that way. Somebody's asking about doing it with higher level. That's certainly something that we can be looked to adding on as another webinar for sure. And I'm going to turn it back to Mark.